بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. وعن جابر رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم دخل يوم فتح مكة وعليه عمامة سوداء، رواه مسلم. وعن أبي سعيد عمرو بن حريث رضي الله عنه قال: كأني أنظر إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعليه عمامة سوداء قد أرخى طرفيها بين كتفيه. وفي رواية له أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خطب الناس وعليه عمامة سوداء. Yesterday we were discussing the various ahadith with regards to the several occasions when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was seen wearing a turban, what we call imama in Arabic. With regards to the color of the turban which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wore or he preferred wearing, ulama ikram mentioned the turban is not restricted to a specific color. In other words, although we find that the general overriding principle when it comes to clothing, and this will include the topi and it will include the turban, etc., is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam preferred white. However, when it comes to permissibility, Allah's Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, other colors were utilized. The color black or the wearing of a black turban, as we see in the riwayat of Jabir radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, that when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam entered Makkah on the occasion of the conquest of Makkah, he was wearing a black turban. And ulama ikram generally mention, as we mentioned yesterday, that the color black will be worn in jihad. The certain wujuhat or the reasons for that, we discussed them yesterday. There is no need to repeat them. However, as I mentioned, when it comes to the color, white will be preferred. Black, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wore in jihad, but we find other riwayat which show that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on occasion besides jihad, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam at times would wear a black color turban. So colors will be the turban is not restricted to a specific color, unless there is one exemption which ulama ikram mention. Unless a certain color turban or any piece of clothing of a certain color or certain type becomes a symbol of some misguided group or religion, then to abstain from that so as not to resemble that particular group will be advised and will be mustahab, will be preferable in Shariat. So in other words, if there is some sect or some group that comes about and they are known for a certain color turban or certain color piece of clothing, then in that instance, if there is a possibility that if you are wearing that, you will be identified as part of that misguided group or sect or religion, then in that instance, obviously, Shariat advises you to abstain from wearing that so as not to resemble them. Other than that, we find that al-amru wasi'un jiddan. It is a very, very open affair. You can wear a brown turban, wear a black turban, wear a white turban, whatever color turban. However, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would prefer white, and on occasion Sahaba saw him wearing black. We should try and revive the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When it comes to the turban and the shan of the turban, Abu al-Aswad Duwali rahimahullah, it's mentioned, قَدْ سُئِلَ أَبُو الْأَسْوَدْ دُوَلِي عَنِ الْإِمَامَةِ. He was asked about the imama and the turban. فَقَالَ, he said, هِيَ جُنَّةٌ فِي الْحَرْبِ. It is a protection during war. وَمَكَنَّةٌ مِنَ الْحَرِّ. It is a protection against heat. وَمِدْفَعْتٌ مِنَ الْقُرِّ. It is also protection against extreme cold. وَوَقَارٌ فِي النَّدِي الْمَجْلِسِ. It is a waqar, it gives dignity, it renders dignity to its wearer in a gathering. وَوَاقِيَةٌ مِنَ الْأَحْدَاثِ. It is a protection from dirt or filth. وَزِيَادَةٌ فِي الْقَامَةِ It adds to the height and presence of the one who wears it. وَعَادَةٌ مِنْ عَادَاتِ الْعَرَبِ And it is a practice from amongst the practices of the Arabs, which obviously include Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there are various benefits, there are various what we call dignity and honor that is attached to the wearing of the imama and the turban. And as we can see from these various riwayat, it was the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. To complete the riwayat which we were mentioning yesterday, Abu Sa'id Amr bin Hurayth radiyallahu ta'ala anhu said, كَأَنِّي أَنظُرُ إِلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As I mentioned, he is telling his audience many years later, it is as if right now I am looking at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other words, I can visualize what I am telling you. It is as if I am looking at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and my Nabi is wearing a black turban. I saw him wearing a black turban. قَدْ أَرْخَى طَرْفَيْهَا بَيْنَ كَتِفَيْهِ The two ends of the turban were hanging between the shoulders of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when it comes to the turban itself, people have different ways of tying it. Sometimes one end hangs, sometimes two ends of it hang, sometimes, as we'll observe nowadays amongst the Turks particularly, they wear a type of turban where there is nothing hanging at all. All these different types of turban, ulama kiram say, would be permissible. In this instance, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was observed wearing a turban where the two ends of it were hanging between the shoulder blades of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the riwayat of, in another narration, it's mentioned, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خطب الناس وعليه إمامة سوداء. The Nabi Pak sallallahu alaihi wasallam was once giving khutbah. This will ostensibly refer to the day of Jumu'ah. It means on the day of Jumu'ah, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was delivering the khutbah in Masjid al-Nabawi, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was wearing a black turban. So this shows that besides jihad also, the permissibility of wearing a black turban when it's also not the occasion of war. As we mentioned previously, and I'm repeating, the preferred color obviously would generally be white. وعن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت كفن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في ثلاثة أثواب بيض سحولية من كرسف ليس فيها قميص ولا عمامة متفق عليه. Allama Aini rahimahullah mentions that generally in Makkah and Medina during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, garments from Yemen were popular amongst the Arabs. These were made from cotton with red or green stripes at times. So when it comes to kafan, what should you enshroud your mayyit in? Aisha radiyallahu anha narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was buried. Kuffina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he was buried whilst enshrouded in 3 white garments of sahuli cotton. There was no shirt or amama amongst them. In other words, the Arabic word for the upper garment, or what we call shirt, or in our understanding we'll say kurta, is qamis. And the word for turban is imama. So Aisha radiallahu anha mentions that the kafan was something separate. It's not like you'll make a person wear his kurta and bury him in that. You will use 3 separate sheets or cloths when it comes to the kafan. And the kafan will not include a shirt or an amama or anything like that. And she describes the kafan of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was basically 3 white garments, 3 white sheets that were of sahuli cloth. Now sahuli refers to a village in Yemen. As I mentioned, that garments or textiles that used to come from Yemen were common amongst the Arabs, particularly of Makkah and Medina. So this describes the kafan of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And from this we learn the preferability that the kafan should be made up of 3 pieces of cloth. Those who carry out the burial, etc., they are more familiar with the manner in which you will tie the cloth. We are not going to go into that detail now. But generally, the 3rd piece of cloth, normally a knot is made, and that once the mayyit is lowered into the grave, then the 3rd knot is released. This is obviously for reasons of facilitating the process, because as you are lowering the body, things can move and things can be revealed, etc. This is why the 3rd cloth is used to cover the kafan before you lower it into the grave. The kafan of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we can see from this riwayat, was comprised of 3 pieces of white cloth. In this riwayat of Aisha radiallahu anha, we learn that it was from Sahuli, which is a town or a village in Yemen. When it comes to burial of the mayyit, using the color white for one's kafan will be preferable. However, Sharia does not fix or lock it to white, but this will prefer where obviously it is available. Sometimes white may not be available for whatever reason, then other colors obviously will be permissible. And as we mentioned previously, this refers to the exception of red. When it is red, it has to be mixed with some other color. وعنها, and also a narration from Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she says, خرج رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات غداة وعليه مرت مرحل من شعر أسود. She says that one morning Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came out. Ostensibly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have come out from the house. He was wearing a shawl which was woven from black fibers, and the shawl had images of saddle bags on it. And this raises the question, sometimes you'll notice clothing has some images on it. As long as the images are not of animate objects, in other words, human beings, animals, etc., those images will not be permissible. In fact, the house in which إِنَّ الْمَلَائِكَةَ لَا تَدْخُلُ الْبَيْتِ فِيهِ تَصَاوِيرُ أَوْ كَلْبٍ. It's mentioned in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a house in which there are pictures of animate objects, or in which there is a dog, the malaika do not enter such a home. That itself is a separate topic, so we're not going to go into those details now. But when it comes to your clothing, sometimes we find that the clothing has images on it. As long as these images are not of animate objects, it will be permissible. In this riwayat of Aisha radiallahu anha, she says Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was wearing a black shawl, and it had images of saddle bags on it. So that will show the permissibility, one, of wearing black. Sometimes a person wears a black outfit. This will be permissible in Shariat. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the rare occasion wore a black shawl. And as we mentioned, with this we learn the permissibility of using woolen clothing, because this shawl of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was made out of wool, woven in fact with black wool. And also, as I mentioned, permissibility of the outfit or whatever it is having images on it, as long as these images are not of animate objects. Allah give us tawfiq.